Hello, kind folk, and welcome back to Comfort in Chaos. If you listened to the past few episodes and gave me some feedback, I just want to give you a shout out and say thank you so much. I really greatly appreciate anyone who, first of all, listens to this podcast at all, but secondly, lets me know what they think about it or what they'd like to hear on the podcast in the future. So if you're listening to this right now and thinking, I'd like to tell Eli what I think, well, this is your invitation to do so. Even if it's not about the podcast, you can just call me up and tell me what you're thinking. And I might have something to say about it, but probably not. Honestly, more likely not. Anyway, on to today's guest. Today's episode idea hit me sort of out of the blue. And it's going to feel really out of the blue compared to the last 3 episodes. But I was browsing the internet, as humans do, Reddit to be specific, and I saw a post in the Asheville, North Carolina community, and it was a picture of a massive double-decker bus passing through downtown Asheville. And under the photo it said, "Look out for this bus. It belongs to the 12 Tribes cult. If they offer you tea and cookies, do not take it, whatever you do." And so naturally, I was just drawn in from the get-go. Cult, tea, cookies, double-decker buses. I needed to know more. So I started researching, and I found a lot of information about the 12 Tribes cult. And it fascinated me and horrified me all at once, but I knew I wanted to learn more about what was going on behind the scenes of this cult. And so I went back to the place where it all began, Reddit. And I looked up 12 Tribes cult ex-member. And sure enough, I found a thread from 5 years ago of an ex-member claiming to know more about the tribe than anybody ever should, and asking the Reddit community to ask him any questions. Now, 5 years ago in internet time, that's a long time. So I felt like my hopes of actually getting in touch with this person was pretty low. But I figured, why not? And I sent him a message. And within an hour, I got a message back. He wanted to come on the podcast. And frankly, I was just surprised and excited. So that leads us here today. Sinasta Colucci has had, to put it lightly, an interesting life. At 21 years old, he left college to go work and live on an organic farm. He wanted to grow his own food, and he wanted to feel secure and taken care of in a community. And he thought by going to work on this farm and live amongst a community of people that his dreams would come true. But in Sinasta's story, you'll find out why some dreams seem a little too good to be true, and how sometimes pursuing a dream can become a nightmare in itself. Now, without me giving away any more of this story, I'm going to let it tell itself. And just to let you know, our conversation was going so well that I'll be splitting this interview into 2 parts so that you can really get a feel for Sinasta's experience. And there's a little bit of a cliffhanger in part 1, but you know what? It's good to be patient. And last but not least, I just want to extend a trigger warning for content that contains violence, abuse, or any kind of manipulative behaviors. Just want to let you guys know. If this isn't for you, that's okay. And without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy my interview with my guest, Sinasta Colucci.
We all are here together just to learn about ourselves and how we can take care of everybody else. Living on a planet that is circling the drain, we do the best we can to not just go insane. It's comfort in chaos.
Good morning. How are you?
Morning. Doing good. How about you?
Doing well. Doing well. Nice to virtually meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Where are you? Where are you checking in from this morning? If you
Right now I'm living in Battle Creek, Michigan.
Michigan, nice.
Yep.
Is that like is that on the eastern side of the mitten or?
Battle Creek is kind of southwestern,
Okay.
kind of like the easternmost part of southwestern Michigan.
The easternmost part of South.
Yeah. So there's Battle Creek and Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids. Those are all considered like southwestern Michigan.
Okay, I have been to Grand Rapids and I've been to Holland, Michigan.
Oh, okay.
Which
Yeah.
is
Holland's a nice coastal town.
Yeah,
Nice tourist.
that's gorgeous.
Touristy place.
I
Yeah.
couldn't believe it because I grew up on the East Coast
Right.
and the Atlantic Ocean and whatnot, and I was like, oh, I've never been to a lake or a Great Lake.
That looks like an ocean.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, what? This is the
Yeah,
ocean.
it's beautiful.
Yeah. So did you grow up in Michigan?
I was born in Michigan, and my whole family's from here. But my mom actually raised my sister and I in California. So I grew up in Northern California,
Okay, I gotcha.
north of Redding.
Nice. Well, I've heard that's a nice area as well. With the
It's
redwoods and all that.
yeah, beautiful scenery.
Lovely. Well, okay, so for all the listeners here, just to catch everyone up, we're here with Sinasta Colucci, going to talk about your experience, well, just some of your life experiences and some pretty interesting life experiences to say the least.
Right.
Most importantly, your story about your experience in the 12 Tribes community. And for those who have never heard of the 12 Tribes, maybe let's just start there and, in your own words, in your own understanding, kind of give us a elevator pitch, a synopsis of what the 12 Tribes community is. Who is it? What do they believe?
Okay, well, they're a Bible-based fundamentalist community. They were founded in the early 70s by Gene and Marcia Spriggs. Gene Spriggs passed away recently. Marcia, as far as I know, is still alive. And they sort of spun off of the whole like Jesus freak movement that was going on in the 70s, and there was a whole sort of movement to get back to the garden, get back to nature, so it was like a combination of like this hippie commune mixed with religious aspects, but initially they just had like homes in the South in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that were just a welcoming place for anyone to come in, and a lot of young people that were at a crossroads in their lives, or maybe they ran away or whatever. They would come into these homes and be welcomed, and they would all go to church together. And they were, I believe, Pentecostals. And then at a certain point they sort of broke away from the church because they disagreed with a lot of the church's doctrines there. And that's when they started to be sort of characterized as a sect or a cult. Is when they broke away from the mainstream Christianity.
Right. And so they began to sort of craft their own.
Exactly.
Story.
Yeah. Create their own traditions and such. Yeah. And then they sort of gradually more and more developed like a Hebrew roots type of thing where, they started giving each other Hebrew names. They didn't start out that way. They started out as just, a bunch of Christians living together.
Right. And so what is the significance the 12 tribes name is obviously derived from
Yeah, from the
Israel.
12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
They believe that they are the new Israel.
Okay. And so, like you said, then that's when the giving up of your given name at birth that started to happen. And so that probably started with the founders, right? So Gene and Marcia took on new names, which was
Yonek and Hyemek.
right. And so, in some publications and some podcasts I've listened to about the tribes, that's kind of who they, that's what they are called within the community.
Right.
And then so anyone after that began who joined the tribe, then the community, so to speak, they had to give up their names, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Take on a new identity.
That's right.
And so, like you said, they kind of began to break away from fundamental Christian beliefs. Can you give us some examples of how the beliefs in the community differ from traditional Christian beliefs?
Yeah, there's a very strong emphasis on the need to live communally in order to fulfill sort of, I guess, God's word, his commands. They point to the book of Acts as being sort of, I guess, mandatory for believers, that anyone who believes is together and shares all things in common. It says all who believe. So if you're not part of the all who believe and are together sharing all things in common, then you're not a true believer, is how they would see it. So you actually have to live in a community, and you actually have to give up all your possessions. It also says in Acts 4:32 through 35 that they gave up all their possessions. If they had lands, they sold it, property. They sold all their property, and they laid the proceeds at the apostles' feet, and then it was distributed to all as any had need. So essentially, it was an early example of communism.
And yeah, it's very familiar, very similar to that. And so it's also very, I guess you could say, literalist of their in their interpretations of the Bible are very
Yeah.
literal in sense of this is what this story in the Bible is saying. He laid this down. So therefore you should too. Instead of maybe some Christian sects take a more metaphorical approach to the Bible, I'd say.
Right. And in that example, they would probably, upon hearing that, say, well, that was for back then, but times have changed. So
Right.
we don't have to do that anymore.
Right. Whereas the community believes otherwise, that you absolutely have to.
Right. They'd say, well, God doesn't change. So the commands are still the same.
And yeah, and it's very all or nothing, very black and white. You're either all the way in, fully submitted, surrendered to their interpretations, or you're damned, right?
Right. Well, they would argue the other way around, though. They would say that with Christians, it's either either eternal life or eternal damnation. There's nothing in between. But what the 12 tribes teaches is actually that there's three eternal destinies. That you can live outside the community as a non-believer and still live a righteous life. If you live
Interesting.
according to natural law, that you can live a righteous life. So they look at salvation differently. For the typical Christian, to be saved means to accept Jesus into your heart and go to heaven. For the 12 tribes, to be saved means to be saved from eternal damnation. So you can do that either through being righteous or by being one of the holy. So there's two different classifications. They
Interesting.
see themselves as the holy, and they see those living a decent life outside the community who have not heard the gospel. That's a important distinction they make. If you had not heard the gospel, did not reject it, then you can live a righteous life.
Interesting.
Yeah, so for me, they would say that, I'm going to hell for sure because
You've
I heard the
witnessed it.
gospel, I rejected it, I don't live with them anymore. And so even though, all I do is get up early, go to work every day,
Sure.
take care of my son, and, I'm just doing the best I can, they would say I'm going to burn in hell for eternity for not living in the community.
Yeah.
So I know this is all confusing, but like
No.
they do make like three different separate categories, three distinctions there.
No, that's very interesting to put it that way, in that they make concessions or forgiveness for the ignorance of people, I guess is what they're saying. Is if you somehow don't know about the Bible or the gospel, then you're okay as long as you live, in their eyes, a decent life, whatever that may mean. Which
for them, the example they like to use is the hardworking farmer in rural China who never had the gospel preached to him. All he's doing is taking care of his family every day. Like, what about him? Does he deserve eternal damnation? And so they would say that he would be in the category of the righteous, which, by the way, the righteous, I guess their lot in life, excuse the pun, because Lot is seen as like the example of a righteous man. He wasn't holy, he wasn't filthy and unjust, he was righteous in God's eyes. So Abraham was holy, Lot was righteous, and then there's lots of examples of filthy and unjust. But anyway, their lot in life, the righteous, is to serve the holy and obey them. So like the 12 tribes, they see themselves as they're going to be kings in the next age and in the eternal age, and they're going to rule over entire planets. And the planets are going to be filled with these righteous people that are just like completely submissive and do whatever the holy tell them to do.
So there's a hierarchy even to their next eternal life. Oh wow.
Yeah, it's all about hierarchy and authority.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so there's some pretty hefty visceral imagery in terms of their portrayal of, and the way they talk about eternal life and especially eternal damnation, right? There's some terms used like the lake of fire and
it's horrible. Weeping and gnashing of teeth and death and destruction. And then at the end of this current age that we're living in, they describe how the Battle of Armageddon is going to be, and that they're going to wipe out their enemies. They believe that that's going to be a physical battle with blood going up to the knees of the horses that they're riding on, and that they're going to dine at the master's table on the flesh of their enemies. It's just, just horrible imagery there.
Yeah. and that imagery is used in a very, and we can get to that part, about how it's used to maybe keep people docile or keep them from
obedient,
right, reverting or revolting too much against the tribe, because if you're given this imagery and you're really believing it, then it's really hard to make a stand against it, because who wants to be, if you really believe that that's going to happen, who would want that fate? I know I wouldn't.
Right.
So before we get to all that, and thank you so much for giving a bit of a synopsis to how their beliefs got crafted and sort of spun away from traditional Christianity. Well, how does the story of Jesus fit into their model? Is it part of it?
It's everything. They see him as, their king, their Messiah, and they see themselves as the bride of Messiah. And a lot of that comes from the book of Revelation, a lot of, poetic sort of, I guess, there's a lot of analogies. They see themselves as the bride that, in the book of Revelation, she's escaping the beast, the dragon, and she flees to the wilderness where she's protected by God. And then, Jesus comes back, the skies are split, and he comes back riding a horse, and this is, like the rapture.
Right.
Those who believe leap up to be with him in the sky, and then that's when the battle happens, and on and so forth.
I see. So it's a very they paint a very romantic portrait of themselves as the innocent, the, like you said, the righteous, right? They're set apart from others who.
Yeah, they see themselves as the holy, and those who live a good life outside of the community are the righteous. They get that from Revelation as well.
Mm-hmm.
It says refers to the filthy and unjust, who of course will burn in hell, and then it refers to the righteous, and it refers to the holy. So it makes like three different categories there according to their interpretation.
Right.
Like that's Revelation 22:11, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, and so a lot of it's coming from that rapture revelation story.
Yeah.
And I have to assume there is that the 12 tribes has its own documentation and books, so to speak, on these stories coming from, Gene or Yonik himself.
Right. Oh,
down
yeah.
to the
Just
elders.
huge collection of thousands they call them teachings.
Mm-hmm.
Huge collection of them.
Wow.
They save every one of them. Everything he said, they took it as, God's word. And this was God's prophet speaking to them, and they wrote down, literally everything he said, and they distributed that to all the different communities all around the world. There were teachings multiple times per week that we would hear. So it was really like ingrained in us.
Yeah. So that's where I want to kind of intersect, where the community intersected with your life. And I read a bit of your book, which is just a fantastic story of your own. And you were very young when you got involved with the community. 21, was it?
Yeah, I had just turned 21 when I joined.
So at that age, I mean, gosh, I shudder to even think about what I was doing at that age.
Right.
But what were you doing in life just before you ran into the community? What did your life look like?
Well, I had attempted college for a year and a little bit more than a year. So it was like a semester.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, a year and a semester or whatever.
When you say attempted, was it not going as planned?
My grades were fine. It wasn't about the studying or, the work. It was more just the living situation.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have, full financial aid.
Sure.
And I couldn't afford to live in the dorms. Ended up getting a job at a fast food restaurant and got a small studio apartment, Midtown Detroit.
Okay.
And I had a lot of health problems. I've got sickle cell anemia. And that was sort of disruptive to my work. And essentially I just, was financially insecure, unstable.
So you're 21 years old. You're new to a new environment. In college,
yeah, I grew up in California. All of a sudden, here I am in Detroit.
Yeah, that would be a jarring thing for anyone who grew up on the coast. I'm sure, for me, absolutely. And you're in a financially vulnerable place, which probably puts you in a bit of a mentally vulnerable place, especially at such a young age. And so I can only imagine it, was a ripe opportunity for something that feels assuring to come into your life.
Right. So yeah, it's kind of like there's the physical aspect and then there's the mental. So physically, obviously, I was like very desperate.
Sure.
And then mentally, I was just like ready to be I don't know. It was like ripe for the picking for the cult because I had just met my dad too for the first time,
Oh,
and he was very religious, and he was the one that basically planted the idea in my head of this community. He used to talk a lot about the end times. He had never heard of the 12 tribes. He grew up Jehovah's Witness, and he sort of broke away from that and just started his own like sort of beliefs. And interestingly enough, he thought that he was going to be a king in the next age. He still to this day he believes that he's going to be the king of Benjamin, that like an entire tribe of Israel.
wow.
It yeah, it astonishes me that there's all these people that think they're going to be like the king of an entire tribe or planet or whatever.
Yeah, it is very interesting.
They
And
can't all be the king, but
right.
yeah. Anyway, so
Almost
he
some,
put
some
this,
Game of Thrones type.
yeah. So he put this idea in my head. He said that a safe place to be, when the end times come, would be in a community where they're growing their own food.
Mm-hmm.
And that appealed to me for a number of reasons. One is I experienced firsthand what it's like to be starving. Not only am I anemic, but I had to go many days without food, and ended up sick and in the hospital at one point. And during those times, I was just thinking constantly about farming. Like when
Yeah.
you lack food, that's all you can think about. I thought about like being self-sufficient and growing my own food, and
Mm-hmm.
I just really wanted to do that. But here I was in Detroit, and I thought to myself, how am I going to do that? And then here's my dad. He comes along and says that, a great place to be would be a community where they grow their own food. And I was like, oh yeah, of course, a community. Like I can't buy land, but I can join
Yeah.
this group of people that already has it.
Right. It hit you at the right place at the right time to
Right. Yeah.
find something to fill that. And so how did you go about finding it? Or did they find you?
I found a website. It was probably a few different websites, actually. One was Willing Workers on Organic Farms, and another one was a list of what they call intentional communities. And the 12 Tribes is listed on both of those.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if they might have been removed since then. I know since writing my book, I got them listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of hate groups, so they might have been removed.
Wow.
But that's how I found them initially, and I emailed them, and they recommended there were two different farms. There was Bellows Farm in New York, and then there was Stepping Stone Farm in Missouri.
Okay.
So they recommended that I go to the farm in Missouri because they said that was my tribe. They basically like they organize the tribes based on the region that you're from.
Okay.
So if you're from the Midwest, then your tribe would be the tribe of Manasseh. So they recommended that I go to Missouri. So they put me in touch with some of the leaders there, and they just invited me to come visit.
What was that first visit like? Could you like paint a bit of a picture and maybe what you were thinking and feeling as you first encountered the community?
Yeah, I was really nervous. I ended up at the Springfield, Missouri Greyhound bus station, and the guy showed up. His name was David, and he had like a big bushy beard and creepy smile, and he just seemed way too happy to meet me. And he offered me some of their tea, yerba mate,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times they'll make it chilled and mix it with different kinds of fruit juice. So it was like a mason jar with this like chilled fruity tea drink that he
Mm-hmm.
brought to the bus station with him, and he had like this old beat up van. And he gave me a ride back to the farm, and it was like an hour drive, middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
and he during the drive he starts talking about the male child and the 144,000 and the all these things, symbolism that I didn't understand what he was saying. And at a certain point, he said with his big creepy smile, he was like, "We've made a covenant," and he like lifted his eyebrows, and he like literally paused at that point. He's like, "We've made a covenant to die to ourselves."
Oh my gosh.
And he like lifted his eyebrows as he's saying that. And I had no idea what he was talking about. Like I wasn't growing up. I wasn't raised religious. Like
Right.
growing up, I didn't think that much about religion or God or any of that.
Right.
I didn't understand the the symbolism there, or like
So up until that point, you had quite literally thought you were just going to a self-sufficient farming community that focused on growing food,
right.
and you didn't grow up religious, like you said. So this was kind of, other than meeting your dad and kind of experiencing his religious, I don't want to be rude and say delusions, but religious beliefs, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you on that. I would call them delusions.
And so then you're in this van with a new person. You're thinking
Yeah.
you're going to go to this.
Stranger danger.
Sure. I mean, were alarm bells already ringing at that point for you? Or
Oh yeah, I was nervous as hell. Yeah.
yeah.
And then another thing I was worried about is he was like, when I told him where I was going, it's like 12 tribes. It's like, aren't they racist? And what's crazy is, like, they kind of are, but it wasn't even the 12 tribes he was thinking of. There's a different 12 tribes. There's a black 12 tribes, and it's just like it's blacks only, and they like I'm mixed, so I don't even know if I would be accepted. But
Right.
like there's a like really actual like vehemently openly racist 12 tribes that are the black 12 tribes. So I think that's who he was thinking about.
Interesting.
But anyway, I was worried on the other side of things. I was worried that they were like more like the KKK or whatever, like that kind of racist. And then I get there, and the first thing I see is a black man, and he's out there in his mud boots cleaning out the chicken coop. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess if, there's a black guy here, then I guess it's all right. I'll be fine.
So that kind of was, it disarmed you for the moment.
I think that was the first thing that like I started to let my guard down. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then tell me, what was the farm like, your first walk around the property? And
yeah, so the first thing first was everybody came out to meet me. It was a small community, but for me it's a lot of people. There was like 12 people there, which is really small for a 12 tribes community. But yeah, they all came out to greet me. They all seemed like genuinely happy to see me, gave me hugs and stuff. It was weird. It's like you're meeting your family. And then they showed me where I was going to be sleeping. It was a room with bunk beds in it, so it was like where all the single men slept. But there was a basket on my bed, and it had a card in it, and it was like a fruit basket. It had like an energy bar and like different kind of treats in there. They call it a welcome basket, and it was just all really nice. It was hospitable. They fed me lunch, more tea, and then they put me to work right away, which that really impressed me too. That's why I was there, is I wanted to feel useful and work hard and have my needs met.
Yeah.
So it was like that part of it was fulfilled instantly, like the first day that I got there.
I see. So what job did they put you to from the get-go?
Well, they showed me the goats, and I think probably just bringing hay to the goats and cleaning out the barn. And then on a daily basis from then on, I was working in the garden with a man named Ben Shimon, and they assigned him as my shepherd, which is, like a spiritual leader.
Mm-hmm.
And it was his job to preach the gospel to me.
As you work.
Yeah, as we work together.
Wow. So you're there. You obviously went to Missouri with whatever you had. Your only possess, or did you have any possessions? Could you even bring anything with you?
Yeah, I had the clothes on my back. I had, toiletries, basics, and I think I had like $200 in my pocket. And I thought, if these people, I don't know, I had like a sort of a test for them. Like if they do this, then you know I'll just give up everything to them.
Then you won't. Then
Like
you
I
won't
had
need
certain
it, right?
tests. Yeah, so I'm like, yeah, I want to give this to them,
Mm,
but I want to make sure.
I see. And so you're there. What is the first, I guess, gathering of the community and the meeting to welcome or initiate you? What is that process like?
When you said gathering, my mind went to like they have gatherings twice a day. Threw
Okay.
me off.
Are they
Sorry.
actually called gatherings?
Yeah, they're called. Well, in Hebrew they would call it a mincha,
Uh huh.
which is like a sacrifice, I guess. But that's their gathering twice a day. But you're asking about the gathering to meet me, like the when they all went out to.
I guess I'm asking, obviously they put you to work, but I'm sure there was like some sort of tribe meeting to talk about you as a person and give you a new name, I would assume, and that kind of thing. Like, what is
Oh, not at that point. No, at that point, the only job was to make sure that I heard and understood the gospel,
uh huh.
and then it's not until after baptism that you get a new name, and it's even then, it's not like everybody gets a name as soon as they're baptized. Sometimes it takes a while for it to like come to them, like, oh yeah, that's their name for sure.
Right. Okay. So it takes a bit of time to prove your worthiness. Is that kind of what it is, or?
Yeah, it's kind of like an interview process where, even if a guest says they want to be baptized, uh, the whole community at that point has to determine whether they're ready or not.
Hmm.
And so they'll ask them questions. So I guess it's a literal interview right there in the gathering,
Yeah,
and anybody can speak up in the gatherings.
I
So
see.
anyone can like ask a question and to make sure that this person is sincere.
Mm-hmm. Which I can imagine maybe puts you, as you start to get affiliated with a community like this and you start to be there every day, work there every day, get to know the people, you kind of want to prove yourself, I would imagine, or you kind of want to be accepted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so maybe that's a bit of a tactic in a way of like, given you have to reach this certain point of trustworthiness. And so you're going to do that for them. Whereas from what I understand and the very rudimentary understanding I have of this cult is that they're pretty desperate to keep people around.
Yeah.
Like they want you there. They want you working. They want you submissive to their orders. So it seems like it's almost from the outside, it's a given you're going to be baptized at some point if you stick around.
Right.
And don't be too much of a thorn in their side, so to speak.
Exactly. Yep.
So how long did it take you to get to that point of baptism?
For me, it was 3 weeks.
3 weeks. That's not very long.
Yeah.
So you must have been pretty obedient, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say I was. I don't know if they would see it that way. I think there's a lot of comments about my Detroitness.
Detroitness.
They said I had a Detroit accent and that I came across as disrespectful sometimes, but it was probably my Detroitness.
That sounds
Yeah,
a bit
I know
racist.
what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so the baptism and all of that, like at that point, so 3 weeks in, you're fresh to religious beliefs as a human. You never had really taken on beliefs. That was a quick adoption on your part. how fast did you start to, in your own self, believe the teachings?
I guess I was just like really eager to believe it.
Mm.
I wanted to believe it, therefore I did. And the thought that came to me, and you have to understand that, in my mind, I saw two worlds. I saw this like brutal capitalistic world that had let me down and was basically allowing me to starve to death, and nobody cared.
Yeah.
And then I saw this community of believers that all lived together, and they all seemed like they were in perfect unity and agreement, and everyone had their needs met.
Right.
And so it's kind of like going from having an empty stomach to a full stomach, and literally being cold and wet. There were times when I was, after I no longer had an apartment, there were times when I was literally homeless and outside cold and wet. And so I had that, physical, you could feel it. You go
Yeah.
from being cold and wet to warm and dry. You go from having an empty stomach to a full stomach,
Right.
and you're just ripe for indoctrination at that point. And so with me, the question I asked myself was, I wonder if the whole world lived like this, what would it be like? And then I thought, I want to find out. And so that's when I like determined that I was going to do everything I could to make it happen. Like I want to find out what it would be like if the whole world lived like this. So I'm going to do my part to make it happen. And that was the determining thoughts that caused me to want to be baptized.
I see. So it's a noble pursuit within your own heart, I guess, of you.
Right.
You had this thing fulfilled, and you thought, well, how many other people could feel this in this cold, hard, capitalistic world?
Right. Yeah, I wanted everyone to be taken care of. I knew there were people all over the world starving to death, and they couldn't work themselves out of that situation even if they tried.
Right.
It's like, how do you do that when you're in the middle of a desert somewhere or something? Like, how do you get out?
Sure. Or just a city, and just trying to make ends meet.
Even in the ghetto, it's hard to get out.
Right. And so that's kind of perhaps the mission that's told to you in the community, is that we want the entire world to be this way, believe this way.
Yeah, one of the phrases they use, and it also comes from the Bible, there shall be no rich or poor among us. That's one of the phrases they like to use a lot, and that really spoke to me too. Nobody's rich there, nobody's poor, everybody just has their basic needs met.
So it's easy. Yeah, I could easily see where you feel a sense of, nobleness to that cause.
Right.
And so, okay, so you're a baptized member, you have a new charge for how you're going to live your life, and it feels good. So did you continue your work? Did you stay working in the garden the whole time, or did they move you into other parts? Because they have if you want to talk about, the community, they have a lot of different ways you can work. Plenty of different ways you can work.
Right. So during that time, even in Missouri, I worked in the garden. I worked in construction. I worked as a cafe worker because they built a cafe while I was there.
Right.
And
those
later
are called the Yellow Deli. Is that correct?
The Yellow Deli was the original.
Okay.
In Chattanooga, and then they sold all of their Yellow Delis, sort of evolved into having several different types of cafes with different names.
Okay.
And one of those names was the Common Ground Cafe. And so the one we built in Missouri was actually a Common Ground Cafe. But yeah, they went back to their roots. They rebuilt a Yellow Deli in Chattanooga in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And it was right around that time that they decided that all of the cafes, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is right. I think they decided that all the cafes should go back to the roots and be named Yellow Deli again. So yes, you are correct in asserting that. But at that time, the cafe we built was called the Common Ground Cafe in Wablo, Missouri. So yeah, I worked in the cafe, and then later on, after a few years there, I became a teacher because they homeschool all the children.
Right.
So that was also one of my jobs there. So yeah, lots of different jobs. And no, I didn't just stick in Missouri. They moved me around a lot. So while I was there, I lived in two different communities in Southern California. I lived at their headquarters in Hiddenite, North Carolina.
Yeah, that's not far from where I am.
Really?
Yeah, I'm in North Carolina.
Nice. Yeah, that was my favorite place. North Carolina is just beautiful.
Yeah, it's a wonderful geographic location for sure.
While I was there, they just like basically just set me free to just work in the garden all day, every day, and I was mostly by myself.
That must have been nice.
It was an amazing opportunity for me to, like gardening became my passion, and I was free to be really creative there.
Yeah.
I bartered with several of the local farmers. There was this old couple. They were like in their 80s. It was the craziest thing. They had a sawmill. I remember like meeting them for the first time, walking up to them, and it's like they weren't in the community. These were outsiders.
Sure.
This old couple, and they like man and woman pushing this log through a sawmill. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen. And they had cedar wood chips, right? And they just like gave them to us. They loved the community. And so I put these cedar wood chips in the walkways of the garden. And so you had like raised beds, and then you had the red cedar wood chips, and it smelled amazing. It looked amazing.
Yeah, sounds idyllic, really.
And yeah, it was, I guess the point is I was kind of free to do my thing in Hiddenite.
Yeah.
And a lot of good experiences there.
That's great. Yeah, I don't want to just focus on your bad experiences, because I'm sure there's a lot to reap.
There are
good life.
There's a lot of bad. I don't want to focus. I wanted to tell an objective story too, and
totally,
and, the good and the bad. But that's not their way. Like normally they don't just like have individualism.
There's not a lot of autonomy.
Yeah, it just sort of happened.
Yeah.
In my case, I guess I got lucky living there.
Well, to a community like that, or let's call it what it is, to a cult, autonomy is a threat to.
Exactly. Yeah.
As soon as people begin to actually have space to think or feel for themselves, then there's a threat that if they dissent from the beliefs, then they're going to leave the community. And if they leave the community, then they're going to talk to other people about the things that happen in the community. And then there's a threat to the whole community's existence, right?
Right. Yep.
And so working in something like a cafe, you're a public facing, you're dealing with outsiders every day. And how is that? How do you reconcile, seeing people living on the outside, they're bringing their computers, they're doing whatever, what is that interaction like when you're in the midst of your beliefs in the community? Are you still in that mindset of, these are people that I can convince?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I was just trying my best. I thought I was doing God's work, and I was trying my best to represent the community in the right light and dispel the myths and rumors that I knew were flying around about us. And just, you just always want to be friendly and polite and explain our life to people the best way that they can understand it, so that they can be saved, because you feel like their eternal soul is on the line.
Yeah. And yeah, I actually went to a Yellow Deli one time. I believe it was 2020 in Boulder, Colorado. And my girlfriend at the time, she was non-religious, but she was like, "Oh, these people have really good sandwiches. I think it's a cult, but like the food is really good."
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Yeah, okay. Well, I'm hungry," and they had gluten-free bread, and I have celiac disease, so I was like, "Well, they win." And we went in there, and it was a very beautifully built facility. There's like wood everywhere and very warm environment.
Right.
And I specifically remember ordering. The gentleman who helped me, he was very kind, very soft spoken. He was kind of wearing some sort of like brown robe or something like that. And
It was probably linen.
yeah, something like that.
It was probably a long linen short sleeve shirt.
Yeah, I believe that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, interesting. And I do remember seeing some pamphlets at the cash register. They seemed very eager, for people to take those about the tribes and the farm and the connection between the two things. I didn't really think twice about it. I just ate my sandwich and went on with my day. And now, I actually just kind of uncovered the 12 tribes because I saw a friend post something about is it the Peacemaker, the bus?
Yep. Yeah. So there's a Peacemaker ship, which is a tall ship that they took all around the world, different tours and such. And then there's the Peacemaker 1 and 2 buses, and they're both double-decker buses that are custom made by the tribes.
Yeah. So I saw a photo of it passing through Asheville, North Carolina, which is
Yep, they have a community there too.
Yeah.
Big farm community.
And so there's all this stir on these comments of people saying, "Oh, this is part of this 12 tribes cult," and I was like, "Interesting." So I started looking into it, and here we are. And then I put the two together. Oh, I've been to this deli. I was pretty shocked to see that it was connected, and then to kind of put together, oh, those people were really nice when I interacted with them. But I assume that's part of the teachings is when you go out into the world, be nice, be welcoming, be non-threatening, be someone that people want to talk more to.
Right. Yeah, that's part of it. I would assume some of them are genuinely friendly,
Yeah. Yeah, I would
natured,
hope so too.
good-hearted people. But yeah, that is a big part of it. Is be that light to the world, the city on a hill, so on and so forth.
Sure. And you had mentioned when you first came upon the farm and all that, you mentioned what you were, I guess, taken aback by was the lack of conflict. Seemed like everyone was living in general harmony. And you mentioned, there's all these myths and rumors going around, and you wanted to dispel those. In your time, I mean, how long were you in the community for?
7.5 years.
So
it was from the spring of 2005 to the fall of 2012.
I see. And so in those 7.5 years, was there a point where that harmony started to were there times that didn't exist? You started to see things in a different way, like, oh, there's some conflict going on, or, I'm sure it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows forever and ever.
Yeah, for a while I was quite naive and thought that the leaders couldn't lie. I thought they were like perfectly honest and represented God perfectly or whatever. But I was lied to quite a bit personally. But then the worst thing I witnessed was they lied to the entire community in Warsaw, Missouri. And during that time, there was a woman who she lived on one of the communities on the East Coast, and she was dying of cancer, and they wanted to treat her themselves. So they did all these things, like they made a salve out of black cohosh, and they tried to apply it to her chest. She had cancer in her chest, and they described it very vividly. Yonek would write teachings that were like basically based on his belief that she represented the whole 12 tribes. And in his mind, it was like she was sick, on the verge of death, but then she started to recover, and he felt like that was representative of, the sin within the tribes that's being healed by God, and that we would recover and once again become a vibrant nation of people. And so he made entire teachings off of this concept, and it was just like, fed to us.
Right.
And we were just constantly praying for her. Her name was Rakefet, and unbeknownst to us, she ended up succumbing to her illness. She ended up dying, and one of the young men from the community in Missouri had been visiting the community where Rakefet was and where she ultimately died. His mother was one of the ones taking care of her, so that's why he was, visiting that community. So he knew that she was no longer alive, and he came back to the community in Warsaw, Missouri, and saw everybody still praying for her to recover. I happened to be standing next to him in the gathering when he, at the end of the gathering, he leaned over to one of the leaders. And he said, they don't know that she's dead.
Wow.
I could hear him, but like nobody else could. And the leader's response to him was, well, we haven't figured out how to tell everybody in light of the teachings and the implications. So essentially they made the decision to hide the truth from everybody for fear that they would stop believing in the 12 tribes. Because it was like she represented the tribes, and so if she's dead, that means the tribes are dead, is what they thought people would jump to that conclusion.
Right.
So I had to watch for a couple weeks as, these people were sincerely praying for her to recover, knowing that she had already died. It was just a horrible feeling. And I wanted to say something, but I felt like I couldn't, because obviously they wouldn't appreciate that, and I would probably be kicked out, and I didn't know where I was going to go. And so there was that fear there too.
Right.
Cowardice, I guess you could say.
Well, I don't know if I would put that on you necessarily as cowardice, but just a sense of survival.
Certainly desperation. Yeah, it was a horrible feeling, and that made me really question. I felt like at that point it didn't seem like it was real anymore. It just felt like it was these, naturally minded men that were naturally trying to lift up this place as being spiritual. And really it was just a dead religion in my eyes at that point, because according to Yoneg's teaching, like, if she dies, we die. It's basically like we were a dead religion at that point.
Right.
In my mind.
And so I can only assume with this woman who was suffering with the cancer, there was no Western medical doctors involved at all.
Not really, no. And the way they described it, it was like she had this big open wound, and that they had applied this salve, and that the flesh started growing back. They described it so vividly, because it was supposed to represent us as a nation. And so Yonek wanted to, really drive home that point.
Yeah.
But the way they described it, it just sounded very primitive. Certainly not modern medicine.
Right. From what I understand, honesty is very lauded in the community. It's very expected that you're going to be forthcoming as a member about yourself if you've done something.
When you're talking about yourself, you got to be brutally honest. When you're talking about the community as a whole, you can't even have any criticism, no matter how true it is. You can't criticize the community.
Right.
You're just not allowed to.
And so I imagine that must have been pretty confusing and maybe disheartening to yourself to discover that they were in fact lying to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how do you parse together this teaching of honesty with pretty blatant dishonesty in regards to another human life.
Well, inevitably, I didn't. I didn't try to like reconcile it in any way. I just took it as at face value for what it was, a lie, and eventually just determined that the whole 12 tribes is just a lie that somebody made up.
So that was a sort of defining moment for you to disassociate from the beliefs of the community.
Yeah, at that point, I just went into survival mode, and I think there was like I was in and out of belief. Like there were times when I like really tried to believe,
Yeah.
and then there was other times where I was just doing the work, going through the motions, as they would say, just trying to get by, just doing the minimum, doing what I had to
Right.
not get kicked out.
Absolutely.
Which, by the way, the minimum there is a lot.
Yeah.
It's not like I was doing nothing. Like it's 16-hour work days. You're waking up super early. If you're on a farm, you're going to be waking up before sunrise to milk the animals, and then because they have goats and cows there, and then you have to get cleaned up and prepared for the gatherings. And then there's breakfast and there's dishes after every meal, and then you have to actually do the actual work that puts food on the table. So it's like either farming or the cafe work or the construction, whatever it is. You do that for the entire day,
Right.
and then you have chores again, gathering again, and then dinner, and then dishes, and you don't go to bed until all the dishes are done and all the cleanup in the kitchen, sweeping and mopping on a daily basis. That's everyone's responsibility. So even the men that are going out to work all day long, on the construction jobs, they still have to come home and do dishes and sweeping and mopping and all that.
Right. And to be clear, this is all for free, so to speak.
Yeah, you're not getting paid for any of that.
Right.
Yeah.
You get what, you get righteousness and you get some food.
Right. Yeah.
And was the food that you were getting from the farm, was it healthy? Was it substantial?
Yeah, there were a few times where I was malnourished and went hungry, mainly in the Southern California community. There were a lot of people there, and I feel like they really struggled to meet everyone's needs. And I struggled to get protein, and I ended up in the hospital many times when I lived in California. And it's on the side of a mountain. That doesn't help. You're burning calories constantly. Just to walk to the garden from the houses is downhill, but then you have to walk back up,
Right.
to for your meals or whatever. And then on the other side of the houses there's an avocado mountain, and so we would have to walk up the mountain to pick avocados and walk back down again, and it was very strenuous. But basically, like, it's not flat ground, and you'd be surprised like how much energy that takes out of you wouldn't think it until you have to use your feet every day.
Right.
What a big difference it makes. The flat ground versus being on the side of a mountain, it's pretty strenuous.
And a lot of us existing in the quote unquote normal world,
Yeah.
under capitalism, don't realize how much of a luxury it is to go to the store and buy an avocado and
Right.
and just go back home and hang out for a while.
Yeah, picking them is strenuous. There's these long poles that you have to like balance and hold up, and they've got snippers on the end, and the avocado falls into the basket, and then you have to pull this pole back down and put it in your bag, and you've got like 50-pound bags. Some of the men, I guess myself included, I'm guilty too, we would like have 2 bags, so it'd be strapped crossways, across our shoulders.
Right.
We'd have 2 bags, and we wouldn't come down the mountain until those bags were full.
Wow.
At a certain point, I was gifted a donkey. That's a pretty cool story too. So I would ride him up the mountain, and then I would fill the bags. I'd have them like balanced on him.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I picked, I made sure I put avocados on both sides so that it wouldn't like just slide off one side. And so the donkey would carry the bags for me down the mountain. So
What a
that's
kind donkey.
yeah.
That must have been a real relief for you too.
It was yeah, it
And
was
some
all
animal
right.
companionship too, it's always nice.
I mean I did get kicked a few times, but yeah, it was a nice donkey. I liked him.
That's
His name
awesome.
was Jake.
Jake the donkey. That's
Yeah.
great, man. And so yeah, this work sounds incredibly strenuous and incredibly exhausting. And you are a young man, but you were a young man at the time. But there were younger people doing this work. Is that fair to say that the children
Oh,
were?
the children, yeah. Yeah, the children would always be with an adult constantly, and there was no playtime. There's no bicycles or, toys or any of that.
Is that because playtime is a diversion from the devotion to your life purpose, God's purpose for you, so to speak?
Yes, that's exactly right. They use the word dissipation. The sin of dissipation is like when you're supposed to be doing one thing, but you do another thing. It's like your energy dissipates, the energy that you're supposed to be providing to, yeah, I guess God, to the community. So burning your energy doing nothing is dissipation. So children playing is referred to as dissipation. So the life of a child in the community, they get up early just like everyone else, and they might come with you to take care of the animals. Their Ima, their mother, helps them get ready for the gathering in the morning. Their Abba, their father, would read the Bible to them or the teachings, and then they eat breakfast. After breakfast, they go to training, which is school, and then after school, they would work alongside either their Abba or their Ima. So either out in the garden or in the kitchen or at the wood shop or the whatever jobs they would do any jobs there alongside an adult.
Right, but they're not really getting help from the adult.
Getting help.
Right, like during the job, the children they're doing full labor.
Yeah, they're seen as the helpers. So like, bring me my hammer. So they go get the hammer, and yeah,
They're
the
fully
the children are
participating.
referred to as helpers. Yeah.
Okay. And if I'm correct here, Yonik referred to children as, I guess, incomplete in terms of their understanding of God. And I'd even heard it, this may be incorrect, maybe you can clarify, but that children can be viewed as Satan in training.
Yeah, they do have a negative view of young children, and I believe it to be psychologically damaging. They think that children are born evil and that you have to beat the evil out of them.
All right, guys, that concludes part 1 of my interview with Sinasta. I know we kind of left off at a pretty wild point, but come on back now. You're here next week, and we will have the rest of the conversation we just ended on and so much more. You're just really not going to want to miss it. I also want to take a moment here to mention Sinasta's own book. It's called Better Than a Turkish Prison. It's available anywhere you get books, Amazon, etc. And it's obviously a deeper dive into his own story than I'm able to get for you guys in a 2-hour span. So buy his book, support Sinasta, and until next week, this has been Comfort and Chaos. We'll see you in part 2 of our interview with Sinasta Colucci. Peace, y'all.